Welcome to this video on the Sun. We're going to be looking at much more positive energies in this card. We've only got a few to go now: the Sun, the Aeon and the Universe. Before I go into the symbolism of this card, we'll just do some divinatory meanings first. In terms of divination, this card is actually very simple. In terms of its philosophy, if we're looking at the more spiritual aspects of this card, there's an awful lot going on, as there is in most of the Crowley deck. So we'll just have a look at some brief divinatory meanings for this card first. So if we take it in its upright position, the Sun represents a more conscious awareness of things rather than working through the subconscious of the Moon. The Moon card is fairly dark in its imagery. In the Sun card, you're looking at far more positive energies, and it's this type of energy that will get us through tough times and help us to succeed. And we're also in a position where we can share our highest qualities with others, being confident in who we stand for. It's a time for embracing goals and giving it everything we've got. The Sun is like the source of our life physically, and there's also like an inner sun, which is our spiritual light as well. So this Sun is representative on many different levels. So if we have been having a difficult time, the Sun brings us the message that things are going to get better, and we're going to find the strength and positivity to get through this period. It also implies simplicity, because we've got the twins here, which I'll talk about in detail. So it can also imply looking at the simple things in life, which can bring us immense happiness, rather than allowing the layers of negativity of adulthood to get in the way. So it's going back to the simplicity of being childlike. So when the Sun shines, we find ways of resolving problems, we find new perspectives, fresh viewpoints. It enables us to think and act more clearly and consider what difficulties lie ahead, and it gives us new ways of getting around those. And it's a way of, it brings an energy, so as I said, we're not trapped in the subconscious pit of the Moon. The Sun brings us out of the shadows of our life, so we can see ourselves and our lives much more clear. If we're going to look at the Sun reversed, then that is really indicating that we're finding it more difficult to remain positive at this time. Life events may have drained our enthusiasm and optimism of achieving our goals. We may be finding it increasingly difficult for seeing the path of our life ahead, or finding resolutions to overcome what problems we have. But it's still important to see that the situation won't last, and that the Sun really is a positive card, and it's really just delaying the inevitable positivity of the Sun. So ultimately that's the pros and cons of the Sun. Again, things reversed would be sticking within the subconscious of the Moon, getting overridden by the Moon's energy, bad dreams. We don't make that transition between the Moon and the Sun, and I'm going to talk about that transition in detail later. Okay, that's it for divinatory meanings, and we will now move on. A brief overview of the symbolism of this card shows we have the Sun forming a large part of the card. It's a lot more prominent than the Moon was in the Moon, and this is a very expansive energy which we have the potential to bathe in. As I said, it happens on many different levels, from our mundane everyday life to our spiritual Sun inside. It contains the rose, the red rose of the rose cross, which we see on the back of the cards, and that is the summation of the union of spirit and matter. That's what the whole rose cross is about. We have the zodiac signs around the outside, which are separated by the sun's rays, so it's energizing all of these different star signs here. And we have a green mound here with a wall about a third of the way from the top. Also very important in this card are these twins, which we will talk about in detail, and it's the third time we have seen these. Okay, on the bottom of the card we've got the rulership here, which is the sun, and we've got the Hebrew association, which is Reish. Just quickly talk about this last bit here. So it's spelt Resh, pronounced Reish. It essentially means head, and that's where our higher chakras are located, and its prominence in this particular card is to do with our higher centers cleansing and ruling over the subconscious, which we found in the moon. I'll talk more about that transition later on. So it's like the revelation of the 1,000-petal lotus. Okay, we will now move on to the Tree of Life. A little bit about the relationship between the Sun tarot card and the Tree of Life. So it's in between Hod, which is ruled by Mercury, and Yesod, which is to do with the Moon. There's also a big connection with Tiferet, which we'll talk about. So these two have very different energies. Hod is associated with higher mind, creative intelligence, spirituality coming down via Tiferet, and Yesod is to do with our subconscious and astral type bodies. So this path is about honing the higher intelligence of Hod to allow the creativeness of Yesod to go in a direction of creating things that are positive and constructive in our life, and to establish goals that are going to evolve us spiritually. Yesod really, as we saw really with the moon card, is a quagmire of both good and bad things in terms of the subconscious. You know, it can be a very creative thing, but it can also be quite a limiting, dark a pit in a sense. So it's the light of the sun really that allows this creative energy to be more positive. And we can see we do have, I mean, just like for instance the music industry or actors and things like that who are very naturally creative people are also prone to things like, you know, drugs and generally having very dysfunctional lifestyles on the other hand. So this is about integration, and this process of integration is really seen if we look at the next section and this hexagram here, where we've got the sun in the center of that, and the sun rules Tiferet here. So we have the Christ consciousness coming down and integrating these two qualities. Okay, we'll go on to the next section and have a look at the symbolism in detail. I think probably I'll just go through again a summary of the information that this section contains. It really says that it's like a transformation of our emotional programming, which is contained in Yesod. It's to do with spiritual expansion, a more balanced personality then, integrating higher mind and subconscious intelligence. If this doesn't happen, if it's not under the influence of the sun here, Tiferet, it can become a energy for greed and materialism, arrogance and self-interest, that sort of thing. So these energies have to come from the higher source here, which is the sun. And it's like anything, there is a duality to every aspect of creation. Okay, that really is it for this section, and we'll go on to the symbolism next. The longer section is this one on the symbolism contained in the sun. We have the central figure, the solar disk here, and it's important to see this in historical context. We have the Egyptian mythology here with this figure here, who is called Amen-Ra, with the sun disk on his head. So the sun has been very central to the Egyptians for a long time. And obviously Thelema is very, well, it's called Tarot of the Egyptians. So Crowley has a different name for this solar disk, and that is Harrow raha. So if we think of him as a one god, but he has dual form when he comes into being, because it's almost like they come into duality, and therefore they have an active and passive form. So active, passive. The passive form he calls Hur Pa Krat, and the active form is called Ra Hur Crete. Horus. So we have this active and passive nature of this god. So the passive form is obviously feminine and is often seen as a god of silence. Another name for him is Harpocrates, and often seen pressing his finger or thumb against his lips, and we'll see this in the Aeon card. So in this particular card here we have the beginnings of quite a lot of Thelemic deities. With Horus here we have a much more active, sometimes being described as a vengeful god, and yet he's the thing that moves and causes change, and so he's much more hawk-headed, and Horus is the god of the new Aeon. Again, we'll look at that in the next section. I've also done an article on the 3 Aeons. So that's the beginning of the symbolism for the sun. I think it's obviously important at this stage to just reiterate the importance of the sun, because it is the ruler of Tiphereth, which is in the middle of the tree of life, which I spoke of earlier, and it is the centre of Christ consciousness. And so the fact that we have the sun here is a very important card. The next thing we're going to have a look at is these blasted twins, which are these two figures here. I say blasted because Crowley doesn't always describe these things that well. The twins we first saw in the Fool card as tiny almost fetuses here. Children in the womb, or very, very young children down at the bottom. Then we saw them in the Lover's card, and again this was a card of lots of complex symbolism and representing dualities, and they appear again here for the final time. And we're going to have a look at their expressions and to try and clarify why they're being displayed as they are. So the first thing to say is that these twins in a way are another representation of this duality of Harrow raha, where you've got positive and negative, or rather active and passive. You've got a male child, a female child, you've got the yellow wings here, you've got the red active wings here. So the red is symbolic of fire, the yellow wings is symbolic of air, because we also had that creative intelligence from Hod, the 8th Sephiroth, ruled by Mercury. So we have air playing out in this card as well. They have butterfly wings here, which is really to do with freedom of the soul, freedom of expression, which is what we'd expect underneath the influence of the sun. So we're just going to compare these to the Hanged Man. If we see they've got their legs crossed and their arms open, similar in a way to the Hanged Man, only he's very much pinned down here, and he has his right leg crossed, they have their leg left, well, one has a left and the other has a right crossed, so they're almost mirror images of each other, but there's a big difference in their meanings. So in here we've got their evolution, we've got their emancipation, which is all to do with the new Aeon, the emancipation of man, the freedom of man. And here we've got very much a card of restriction. So it's like this restriction has been removed, and the soul of the Fool has now moved on to be able to express itself much more freely and much more openly, and they bathe in the light of the sun there. I think also implied in these twins is the breaking down of gender barriers, in the sense that we are now at this stage, this late stage in the path, moving beyond male and female, and we're just seeing a liberated soul. So it's moving the self, the small self, into the big self, where you're finding more and more union and less individuality. These twins are seen to be dancing on these discs here, which have like a Tau cross on them, which is a little bit difficult to see, but the Tau cross is essentially like an equal-sided cross here, and that is within the disc, so that is pretty much it. And again, the cross itself is a symbol of like the old Aeon and sacrificial gods, such as Christianity, for instance, where you've got the symbol of the cross. I do talk a lot about the mystical meaning of the cross, which has nothing to do with how traditional Christianity as a religion looks at it, but what Crowley is essentially trying to get at is that this freedom of the soul through spiritual revelation is something which supersedes this old idea of sacrifice and sin, which we see a lot of coming from a traditional Western religion. further to the sun itself, we have these like rainbow coloured rays coming out, and they energize these zodiac signs here. So if we think of a prism, really, where you've got I'll just very generally see if we can just do the shape where we've got like a triangle here, and we have like the one ray going in, and you have the full spectrum of colours going out. So you've almost got this like white light here, and you've got the rainbow effect here, and that is really the process by which it's like an analogy for spirit, the white light coming into creation and giving it its individuality and colour. And this is what is essentially happening here. You've got the energization of the signs of the zodiac. And if we look at it even further, we can see that we've got the one ray here, or the larger ray, and in between we've got three separate rays. 1, 2, 3 here, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on in between. This represents the Decans, which we talked about in the minor arcana and in the court cards, where you've got each star sign here, and you have each star sign of 30 degrees is divided up into 3 10-degree segments. So you've got first 10 degrees is the first decan, then you've got the second and third decans, and the various different court cards and minor arcana cards rule each decan there. So I've gone through those in the court cards and minor arcana section, but that's just another element of the symbolism in this card. And it's worth mentioning, we've also got this green mound. The fact that it's green, it does indicate the fertility that's associated with the sun. Obviously the sun enables, it gives light and life to plants and grass, and it is to do with growth, so it is a reflection of our spiritual growth as well. It's important probably to note that we have this wall around the whole of the summit here. With mounds and summits, it's again another biblical thing, because we have Mount Ararat, and the mystical meaning of a mountain is a high place, because your perspective on top here is one little man on top is of a greater viewpoint looking out. So they are very symbolic in their meaning, the fact that this is actually a mound shape. Again, valleys and plains, again, biblically are to do with, again, the valleys are to do with our lower consciousness, if I can spell it. So we have the fertile mound here. The fact that it is, you've got these yellow specks and red all sort of integrated here, is an integration, as I was saying, about the unity between male and female. So what it's saying really, you've got this wall here, is that the higher your perspective, the more these gender barriers and this sense of self and separateness, the more it just integrates into the one. And so there'll come a time when all of this is just emerged within the light of the sun. And I think that's probably a good place to end this section, so we'll move on to the next one. This is a very brief section on the transition from the previous card, the moon, to the sun. I have touched upon this, and there is far more in my notes, but it's all to do with the process of letting go to the higher mind here, which is represented in the sun card. And this actually brings about many changes in the way that we see ourselves. We shed off those old images and that quagmire of the moon and the up and down cycles that we see there. So the sun and the solar disk here is very small here, but here it's huge. So it's coming into that light to be more conscious of our spiritual self and our daily self. And this is what this transition really is in a nutshell. For this final section, we'll look at the sun in relation to the Celtic cross. So if it turns up in the heart of the matter situation, the very first card, this is really indicating that we can find happiness and contentment in our lives. It's a reason to be optimistic. It's a very good card. So even though there are difficulties that could appear in the spread, this is a really energetic card to have in the first position. And it's really also saying that it's trying to remind us to be as pure in heart as possible, and to look upon achievements as not just being materialistic in nature, but for being of our best benefit. So it's reminding us to be pure inside. Challenges to the issue, possible obstacles, could be that traumatic events from the past are clouding our positive vision. This energy of the sun is being clouded over by things from the past. Subconscious influences, self-doubt, lack of support, bad dreams. It's the effect of the moon coming in and not making that transition between the sun and the moon. But this might just, again, be the mind just playing games. The past could represent happy times, which may be dwelled upon too much instead of looking at the present. It's almost looking for things that in the past which we've found to be so wonderful, and we don't let go of that just to move into the present. The good side of that is that we have had those times and we can have them again if we so choose. Again, things like health situations and what have you can get in the way of that, but you know, that's the complexities of karma working out. Okay, we move on to hopes and goals. To find happiness, lead a more simple life, finding the simple pleasures in life. Immediate future would indicate a great reason to be optimistic and to follow the goals that you want. Clarify them, write them down, focus. It's a great opportunity, a great time for you to follow your goals. Self-image is one of optimism, outgoing, goal-orientated, being inspired to do and be our best, and it's a reminder of that. How others see you or our environment? Well, that would indicate a warmth environment in the family or relationships, being supportive and inspirational. Guidance and warning, if the sun appears here, again, it's guiding us to live in the present and to live simply. That very valuable things in life are not always material. So it's that sort of thing, and allowing positivity to be in our life without judging it, to just let this energy of the sun just flow, and for us to just be a channel for that without blocking it. And the overall outcome, well, that has to be good. Achievement of our goals, our highest ideals. So it's having that light, whether it be the light in our everyday life or our spiritual life, shine in our life. and it's being at one with our spiritual source. So these are just a few ideas of how the sun can relate to a Celtic cross. Okay, all the notes are on my website, and next we move on to the Aeon